welcome back to my channel and to another review. Today we have another biographical film, another film that, without planning, tackles racism, although it's mostly about sexism. Racism takes a bit of a backseat in this one. It's kind of crazy that these are the two films that I watched 2 weeks ago before the world the world was already descending into chaos. It's just now, it's there. So I'm saying this at the start of my videos because I feel like it's really important that everybody is made aware. If you want to help and you really are watching what's going on in the US right now and you are just like, oh my god, what can I do? You can do something. You can do what I've been doing. You can follow this link that is on the screen, which is also down in the description box. Feel free to click that. Go to blacklivesmatters.carrd.co. There you will find a long, extensive list of petitions and funds. You can sign petitions, you can donate money, and you can do both. It is entirely up to you, but these things take no effort and doing them will help tremendously. I highly encourage you to do so. I have done that and I may probably do it a little bit more once I have money, as I'm currently fresh out of money right now. But as soon as I get some more, I'll probably donate some more money. But even if you don't have money, there is a never-ending list of petitions that you can sign. I've been doing it. I strongly encourage you guys to do it too. It's really important in these hard times, first with COVID and now with this. We need to come together and help each other. First, it was important that we are and should still be aware of what's going with COVID. COVID has not ended. Things are going crazy, but please, everybody, especially if you are somebody who is out in the protest or you know someone who's protesting, please make sure that they are taking precautions, not just because you have to now protect yourself from very visible threats, whether it be the police or whatever, but you also have to protect yourself from the invisible threat that is COVID. There is danger coming at people from all sides, and it's really crazy. Someone made a joke saying, why is 2020 trying to be like 1918 and 1966 rolled into one? And it's true. We have a pandemic and we're still in 2020 trying to fight for equal rights for all races, and I'm just like, are we sure this is 2020? Because 2020 sucks. First thing I want to talk about is not me going on about civil rights matters. I actually want to talk about a historical fact about this film that, once I learned it after watching this film, has really messed with my head, and I'm still trying to wrap my head around it. So I will go into depth of what this film is about and my thoughts on it, and of course, as I seem to be doing more often these days with biographical films, I will be talking about the fact and the fiction and kind of putting it all into perspective. But here's an interesting thing. So this film depicts the moment in history that sparked the women's liberation movement. It is a moment in the Miss World competition where female protesters began throwing flower bombs and waving signs, and they had these little rattles or something, and it sparked a huge march of mostly women, but various people coming together to fight for equal rights. And that's beautiful. But here's the thing that I learned. So during Miss World competition, the women began their protest during Bob Hope's speech. The thing is that they did not intend to begin their protest during Bob Hope's speech. They actually intended to start throwing their flower bombs, and I don't mean flowers, I mean like bags of flour that you'd use for baking. They intended to throw their flower bombs and start waving their signs while every female contestant of the Miss World competition was on stage. But during Bob Hope's wonderful bit of monologue, he made some very derogatory and sexist jokes about women, which angered the female protesters and basically triggered them and caused them to enact their plans a little earlier than intended. So in a messed up way, we kind of have Bob Hope to thank for the women's liberation movement, and I can't quite wrap my head around that because that was really messed up. Because think about it. Do you think that the movement would have been as powerful and effective as it was if the images of the protests saw women attacking women? Just think about that. A group of women not understanding or even trying to understand the reason for why these women would want to get on stage and put themselves through this without even trying to understand their reasons why or what it means to them, were going to attack them on live TV. Can you see that as being the moment for history to look back on and go, whoa, women's lib? Because I can't. If I were to see that on TV, I would not feel empowered or inspired. I'd feel disgusted, regardless of how I might feel about pageants such as that. To see women attacking other women and claiming it's for women's rights, that is supremely messed up. So if that night, if Bob Hope had not been Bob Hope and made the disgusting jokes that he did about women, those protesters would have waited and attacked women instead. But instead, they were so angered by his words, they attacked him. Him! And that image of them fighting back against his sexist jokes and words ended up sparking the women's liberation movement. That was the catalyst. So, like I said, in a messed up way, we have Bob Hope, the sexist, philandering Bob Hope, to thank for the women's liberation movement. And I'm just kind of like, what? But that's kind of history for you. Numerous times in history, sometimes something going right happens by accident. You plan for one thing, and then life happens. And it takes a twist. And somehow it works for the better. And I honestly believe in this case it worked for the better. I don't think that the movement would have been as empowering. I don't think women would have been as empowered if the images on the TV and in the papers around the world were of women attacking women. So, now that I have said that interesting little tidbit of history, how about we get into the actual review? Misbehaviour is a 2020 British comedy drama film directed by Philippa Lowthorpe with a screenplay by Gabby Chiappe and Rebecca Frayne, from a story by Frayne. The film follows the events of the 1970 Miss World competition, which saw the crowning of the first black competitor. For a film directed and written by women about the act that propelled the women's liberation movement of the 1970s forward, you'd think I'd have felt more empowered watching it, but in all honesty, I felt about as met and disappointed as I am by most films made claiming to promote female empowerment. This film depicts a crucial moment in the history of women's liberation and still manages to make men the central focus of its story instead of the women. There are a number of important stories in this film to be told, and yet the film focuses the most on the ones that matter the least. The film could have talked more about the movement itself, how and why it was growing, and told us more about why these women in particular were fighting so hard for it, but it doesn't. I actually enjoyed Keira Knightley in this film and felt she had an interesting character. The film started by giving her character an important platform and reason to want to be involved in this movement. It begins by showing us her applications and seeking an academic career. She wants a seat at the table and is working hard to get it, but as a woman, no one wants to hear her and all she's worth is based on her appearance. That right there is a great motivator for her actions during the rest of the story, but the film detours from that and depicts her actions being more based on wanting to do it for her daughter and less for herself. They had moments now and then that showed her being disrespected by men in study groups, and each time it happens she becomes more and more angered and emboldened. But the moments where she becomes the most reactionary are when she responds to her daughter or mother. It bounces from being about her having a dog in this fight and her having drive and determination to doing it because she wants her daughter to be more than just pretty. I wish her story was more about her pursuit of an academic profession and less about being offended her mother let her daughter wear makeup. There's actually a scene in the movie between Knightley's character Sally and her mother, played by Phyllis Logan, where for a moment I sided with Sally's old-fashioned mother over her. Sally belittles and chastises her mother for not wanting better for herself and for having no ambition, and admiring her father because he had money and career and lived a more exciting life. We're talking about the 1950s, where her mother would have had even fewer rights than Sally had at that moment. Her mother would more than likely have not been allowed to work or have an income, and would have been shunned by society and even her husband for acting outside her role. Sally was insulting her mother for not having any rights, belittling her for something she had no control over. All her mother could be at that time was a housewife, but she was going to be the best she could. A woman heavily devoted to her children. She never stopped, as throughout the film you see her stepping up to the plate to raise Sally's daughter for her so Sally could seek out an education and career. Sally's mother put her children and family first her whole life, and her daughter threw back in her face like it was her fault for having no rights. I did not like this scene at all, and while I think it was important to show a generational difference, I think it could have been handled differently. In 1970, the Miss World competition crowned its first black competitor, Jennifer Hostin from Grenada, played by Gugu Mbatha-Raw. This was a historical moment for a woman who would later go on to become a diplomat. Yet her story and the subject of racism itself felt like a footnote hidden amongst the women's lib movement. After the events of the film, where we see the group of feminists disrupt the Miss World competition, Sally and newly crowned Jennifer Hostin have a moment where Sally explains how it wasn't the winner, but the competition they were fighting against. When Jennifer points out how to her this wasn't about gender, it was about giving a voice to all girls of color just like her, who by seeing her win might be given hope that they can grow up to be something. This stunned Sally because no one seemed to notice that in most of the scenes showing these feminist women, you weren't likely to spot a woman of color. It was a powerful moment where one movement essentially told the other, "You shat on my attempts to do something better for people like me." Luckily, thanks to Jennifer's win, she was able to do good with it. But like I said, this film did a good job at focusing its energy away from all the important stories, and certainly didn't seem keen to go too in-depth into its characters of color. There were more shots of Hostin looking deep in thought as opposed to talking about what this win would mean for her and people like her. I would have liked to see more of that. A strange omission was the runners-up lineup. In Miss World, there are 4 runners-up. This film only mentioned and depicted 2 being declared runners-up. First runner-up went to Miss Africa South, Pearl Jansen, whose entry into the competition came during the apartheid era in South Africa. The film also, during the end, when it has a chance to speak about what the real people went on to do after the competition, chooses to omit the fact that Pearl's first runner-up placement gained her open doors to many events in her native country that would otherwise be closed to anyone of colour. And while they were only open to her begrudgingly, she took the opportunity and position and used it to do a lot of good, and essentially became an ambassador for her country during a dark time, but to this day she still is not given credit for it. Second runner-up was Miss Israel Irith Lavi, but in the film that's all that gets mentioned. It chooses not to say that there was a third and fourth runner-up, third being Miss Sweden Marjorie Christel Johansson, who was considered the favourite to win, and fourth runner-up Miss South Africa's Gillian Jessup. Now, excluding these remaining 2 runner-ups isn't vital to the story, I just find it such an odd thing to choose to exclude. A lot could have been delved into regarding Miss Africa South and being a black woman nominated during this apartheid, but again, they skimmed over this part of the story too, much to my disappointment. While all these things were enough to complain about, they aren't my main issues. Earlier, when I spoke about the film focusing on the parts of the story that mattered the least, I was not referring to Sally or any of the Miss World contestants. I was actually referring to Bob Hope. In this film, Bob Hope is portrayed by Greg Kinnear, and to say he did a terrific job would be an understatement. Not only did he nail the impersonation, he looks damn near just like him, and it was impressive. But if I'm impressed, then why would I be annoyed? Simple, because this film focused far more on Bob Hope's misogynistic tendencies and his philandering than it did any other aspect of the story. The film opens with Bob Hope hosting a USO show where he introduces former Miss World 1961 winner Rosemary Franklin, who went on to have a 30-year affair with Mr. Hope. Bob Hope's infidelity and complete disregard for all women in general is no secret. Hell, it even has its own Wikipedia section and has been exposed in many tell-all books. So why was it mentioned so much in this film? Answer, I haven't a clue. The film at every opportunity shows Bob Hope making passes at women, sexually harassing his female staff, and whenever his wife is on screen with him, she is continually bringing up his affair with the former Miss World winner and how she knows it's ongoing. But what does that have to do with the central story? Again, nothing. Now, Bob Hope was indeed the host of Miss World 1970, and it was his inappropriate jokes about the opposite sex that set off the protesters in the audience and prompted them to leap into action. That single act was perfectly fine. We could have seen him show up, interact with the contestants, and act like the gross pig he was, and that would have been enough. But instead we have a film that chose to dedicate far more time to demonizing Bob Hope than empowering its female characters. A common occurrence in many female-led films wishing to focus on female empowerment is that they actually end up wasting a great deal of energy in picking a male villain for the story and trying to make him look as vile and pathetic as possible and a real enemy of women, instead of spending that time and energy on developing and lifting up its female characters. And that's precisely what happens here. I learned more from this film about Bob Hope's infidelity than I did about the women's liberation movement, the apartheid in South Africa, or the fact that this was the first Miss World competition to result in a black contestant winning. This historical moment, which is part of the film's synopsis, is barely even mentioned in the film. It's maybe said for 2 seconds and that's it. Instead, we cut to a scene where Bob and his wife are having a stupid and pointless conversation about Bob Hope being Bob Hope and his wife just not caring. Why was any of that necessary? You had an incredible story to work from, several empowering moments, not only for all women but women of color, and you threw all that away to give me dozens of scenes of Bob Hope making passes at women with the worst jokes I've ever heard. This film prioritized everything wrong, and for that reason I am incredibly disappointed. Why do films like this think that women move forward faster if we trash men more? We are more empowered when we focus on the story of women who paved the way, hearing why they did it and understanding what others have done and seeing what we are capable of. If I wanted to see a film focus on a sexist man, I've got thousands to choose from, but I watched this to learn about a crucial moment in the history of my gender and the history of women of color, and all I got were footnotes. Even written and directed by women, the story of women was still not as important as the story of who a man screws. While I appreciate the end credits showing the real faces of these women now and what they have done since, the fact for so many they left out important facts that speak volumes to who these women are and what they have done for others just further angers me. So much potential wasted. There were great performances, the pacing was fantastic, and the costumes and sets 100% felt like time traveling back to the 70s. But all these positive things are overshadowed by the disappointing storytelling depicted on screen. I think we maybe only have 2 brief mentions of the apartheid in South Africa, and one is Miss Africa South. For those who don't know, there were 2 competitors from South Africa, both made it as runners-up, and to differentiate between the 2, the white woman was called Miss South Africa and the black woman was called Miss Africa South. Really weird, don't ask me why. Anyway, there was maybe one moment where she talks about how she has been instructed not to talk to any members of the media, specific names she has been given. She is not allowed to talk about anything that is going on back home. If she does, she will not be allowed back in the country. And that's it. we have that one moment but there's so much you could go into with that. Like, educate me, tell me about the apartheid, and then tell me what this means for you being a black woman living in a country in the middle of an apartheid. What does this competition mean to you? Like, I need to hear that. I want to hear that. And then I think there was definitely an explosion. There was a bombing that happened, and I think it turned out being related to the conflict in South Africa, but it was so glazed over, and it was more people talking about how they suspect that the women's liberation movement did it, and then it turns out they didn't. But like, they put it there and then they did nothing with it. It's very, very strange. There was just one too many missed opportunities with this film. And considering it's such a crucial moment in history for so many women, and during such an important time for, again, women of color, people of color, and instead really all I got is a story telling me about what a dick Bob Hope was. And I didn't need a movie to... Okay, actually technically I did, because I did know Bob Hope was such a prick, and this film did tell me that about him. But surely there were other films that I could have watched that told me that, and I didn't need it in this story because the story was not about him. It was about something so much more than him, and the film really just kept the focus on him. You don't have to agree with me. That's the thing about films. But when I think back on that film, I barely remember anything to do with the women, but I can reel off every single scene that depicted Bob Hope being a prick. I can reel them all off because they were very present, they probably lasted the longest, and they left the most impression. And that shouldn't be the case. So therefore, I'm not only disappointed, I'm a bit irritated. But anyway, if you want to learn anything about any of the people who actually, the competitors, or any of the people involved in the women's lib movement, just go Google them. You can learn so much more from Google than you can from this film, and that's freaking sad. But anyway, if you have seen Misbehaviour, please comment down below, share your thoughts on it. I would love to know what you thought about this film. We don't have to be pricks here. You know, it's just a movie. Just share some opinions. These are mine. But that is it for today's video. Thank you to everyone who watched, and thank you as always to my amazing patrons. Again, I can't thank you enough for your support and choosing to support me in these hard times. Believe me, I know all about them. Okay, not the racial stuff. I know more about the, you know, unemployment and poverty stuff. That's my wheelhouse. So thank you guys so much again to all of you. Please take care of yourselves, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.